All right, we're going to get started. I'd just like to thank everyone for coming this year. We're thrilled to have you. So this year, we're going to try something a little bit new, and it's called the pitch panel. The idea is that there are 4 companies, and each company will deliver a 5-minute presentation. And then we have our lovely panel of moderators who are going to provide about 5 minutes of commentary. The moderators are Allegis founder, Bob Ackerman, Wells Fargo CISO, Rich Baich, and Trident Capital Cybersecurity founder, Alberto Yepez. And first up is KnowBe4.
So I'm giving myself 3 minutes, and then we'll do some questions and answers. What we do is called new school security awareness training, as opposed to old school, which is herd them all in the break room, keep them awake with coffee and donuts, and death by PowerPoint. What is new school? It's you do a baseline test. You find out what the fish-prone percentage of your organization is. So now you have a catalyst. You use that catalyst to say, hey, we need to do something about this. If this would have been the bad guys, we would have been owned. So we're going to start everyone on a interactive, engaging training through the browser. You can do this when you want. There is a deadline. That's your basic step 2. So step 1 is baseline. Step 2 is training. And step 3 is frequent simulated phishing attacks. And that could not just be only phishing. That could be a call to their phone on their desk, or it could be a text to their phone. Essentially what you want to do is you want to create a security culture, and this is an essential element. What we continue to say is you need to have defense in depth, and that means all the way from the bottom up, you need all your technical layers in place. But you also need to create your human firewall, which really is your last line of defense. It is the last line of defense because you've all heard that the bad guys, mostly in Russia, this guy you see walking into the Russian Ministry of the Interior wearing a $3,000 Armani suit, used to be a black hat hacker, and now he's a major in the FSB. And these guys are just let loose. Putin is not stopping this. So you're looking at sustained attacks on your infrastructure, and the bad guys go for the low-hanging fruit, which is the employee, because I think we all agree the employee is the weak link in your IT security. So from that perspective, I am here to just ask you to tell your friends and your portfolio companies and anybody else you know that they need to train their employees against these types of social engineering attacks. That is the main pitch. And I'm basically done with my pitch, and let's just see if we have 7 minutes left for questions and discussion. Anybody?
So I've got one. So you run these simulated, phishing attacks. What do you do with the results of that? I know organizations, for example, that actually post that information, to kind of humiliate and embarrass people into taking things seriously.
Good question, but no, that is not the right approach.
It works, I think.
It works, but it's not the security culture that you want to create. You want to take up individual fails with the employee. If someone fails, you can do a couple of different things. You can put them on a landing page that says, oops, you clicked on a phishing link. Or you can have them do an immediate interactive remediation training. Or there's 5 or 6 different things you can do. It becomes HR if someone continues to fail. And at a certain point in time, they need to be read the Riot Act, but HR.
So obviously you're addressing a big risk, right? The human element risk. But how are you able to measure it? What I mean by measure it is The fact that you have X number of employees in your organization clicking on it, is there a way to demonstrate what risk or mitigation has occurred as a result of it?
Yeah. What you get if you subscribe to this SaaS service is first thing you do is you log on, you get a graph. And the graph starts with your baseline test, which could be 20% of people clicking. You then see the training happen, and over time you see that number, what we call the fish-prone percentage, go down. We took a 300,000 large seat test over 12 months, and we saw that line slowly go down from 16 down to about 1 or 2%. It's never going to be perfect. There's always people that are going to click, but you can mitigate that risk significantly.
Yeah, the question that I have, I guess you're addressing a big market, so great. In training, simulation, we talked about in prior panels that, we need to educate, we need to bridge that gap from the lack of cybersecurity professionals and awareness.
Yep.
So what is your go-to-market? How do you bring a scale? Because at the end of the day, you're either selling to HR, you mentioned HR, a little bit of compliance, you talk about the CISO. So can you give me a sense of when you call upon an organization, who do you call and how do you broadly deploy it?
Yeah, I'm an IT security guy. This is my 5th startup, the last one. I built an antivirus product from scratch. We had a couple of million endpoints running, and we saw infections happening all the time anyway, so we started to unpack that and pull the string, and voila, social engineering. So I looked around, and there were only a few companies doing that, and nobody was really taking care of the SMB. So I built this company from day one. Does it scale? So we do not sell hours. Everything is through a self-serve console. They upload their own users, they start their own campaigns. We have about 10,000 customers now, and they all subscribe to the service, and they get a little help. Customer success comes afterward and helps them deploy, but that's essentially go-to-market. We do direct. We have a channel, but at this stage of the game, we're still in education/enlightenment for most part of the market, so we do this straight to the end user. And we sell to IT. We do not sell to HR. They don't understand one itty bit of this.
So you indicated, though, that if someone demonstrates sort of an ongoing risk profile, that it becomes an HR issue.
Yes.
So how do you close that? IT is the customer. IT has the interests, but it gets to HR if there's remediation. So explain that a little bit.
IT feels the pain. They need to re-image that workstation, and they know who their troubled children are. So what we recommend, and we have an example template, is to create a company security policy where it is clearly laid out for all employees. First time, click, warning. Second time, click, warning. Second time, third time, you're going to have a chat with your senior, your direct supervisor. You basically create a scale that escalates, whereas 9 or 10 clicks means written warning. And depending on the industry, termination. You become an active liability for your network security, so HR is going to step in at one point in time.
Okay.
So you've been in business how many years?
Say again?
How long is that?
I sold my last company in 2010. I was retired for 5 days, and I started the first 1.0 in April 2011.
So what is your renewal rate, and then what is the biggest reason why your customers are renewing?
Why they are renewing? Renewal rate is 85%. And why they are renewing, we have this, we cannot say the word solution in KnowBe4. This is not a solution. This is a great way to manage an ongoing problem. Because if you stop sending phishing tests to your users, 3 months later, they start being click happy again. So what we find is they renew because they see it works. And there are 4 reasons why you should do this. One is compliance. obviously in this industry, that's a given. Second is the risk of a data breach. Third, I would say legal. Most people don't know, but if you have cyber insurance, but your employee clicks on a link and that causes an infection, the downtime caused by that infection is not covered by your cyber insurance because it's a human error. Last but not least, ransomware. So these 4 reasons are why people continue to send phishing attacks to their users.
What is your average customer size?
It sits in the 200, 300, 400 range.
Okay. All right.
We have about 9,000 SMBs and about 500 large enterprise, 1,000 and up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the average sales price hovers around 5K these days.
So 5K for 300 to 400 customers, is that per month annually?
That's an annual
Okay.
charged upfront.
Okay. All right.
I know I've hit my 10 minutes. I have a stopwatch right here. So one more question and then the hook. Okay, the hook. All right.
What's the next feature coming out?
We are working on ADA. ADA is artificial intelligence-driven agent. And that is essentially an AI that is going to be able to social engineer your end user. That's fun. If you see that work, that's fun.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
And next up, we have Eyal Goldwerger, who is the CEO of BioCatch.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. I am the CEO of a company called BioCatch, and I will use a little bit of a presentation format to help show some of the stuff we're doing. BioCatch is in the area of behavioral biometrics. Behavioral biometrics is a relatively new field of research that company helped pioneer a few years ago that looks at the interaction between a human being and a device or an application in real time, how you interact with a website or a mobile app. And based on your behavior, we understand something about who you are or who you're not. We work typically with large banks and financial service firms to provide continuous authentication. We sit in the background, we look at the user behavior, and if we detect an anomalous behavior, we're able to say something about a fraud or a hack that is happening. It could be an account takeover, it could be a traditional threat like malware, or something advanced like a remote access Trojan that is taking over the account. We detect robotic as well as human activity that is nefarious. We work with large banks. We monitor both account takeover situations where somebody is taking over somebody's existing account. We also now provide a new product around new application fraud. There are a lot of identity theft and people using stolen data to start new bank accounts and new credit card. We can detect the wrong behavior with the right information. We monitor over 4 billion transactions a month. We actually now have 22 granted patents, another 26 pending. Our team is over 50 people here in New York, Boston, London, Tel Aviv, where we have come from, and Colombia. And we have an interesting team that has come from both the Israeli military intelligence as well as various security and fraud companies leading in the space. The market in which we operate is coming of age. So fraud prevention in general is becoming a very large market because as we all know, identity theft is rampant. Sophisticated methodologies of fraud are on the rise, and you can see a little bit of the expected growth. Within that, behavioral biometrics is one of the up-and-coming areas that is starting to get traction right now in the marketplace in terms of security measure for financial service firms. A little bit about the history of our market and why what we do is so unique. So if you think about the evolution of fraud and anti-fraud solution over the last 20 years, it's been a bit of a cat and mouse game, a bit of a race to the bottom. Somebody comes up with a way to hack accounts. Somebody comes up with a way to counter that. And it's been a really ongoing struggle for the entire industry. So 20 years ago, people used username and password, so people stole username and passwords. A whole industry came about trying to assess risk by looking at things like what is the geographic location of the user, what is the IP address that they're using, which device they're coming from. Companies like RSA and other large companies came into the marketplace, and with it came fraud 2.0. People invented malware. Malware now went into your computer, and now you came from the right IP, from the right geo, from the right device. So anti-fraud 2.0 came along, which is anti-malware companies, and so on and so forth. And you can see where this story is leading. The problem of the industry in the macro is that anti-fraud has been predicated around looking at the sources of threats. And sources of threats can always be eventually masked or spoofed. What behavioral biometrics does, and what we do, is we go all the way to the destination with the user in real time, and we simply see if the user is a right user or if there is anomalous behavior that detects that wherever you may have come from, you're simply the wrong user in the session. We monitor over 500 parameters per user. We look at both physical hand-eye coordination things like the curvature of your mouse movement, the cadence of your keystroke, what angle you're holding your mobile phone, your swiping pattern, how hard you press on the phone, and many, many other patterns. On top of the physical attributes, we also look at cognitive attributes. These are the psychological elements of how you behave online. All the preferences that you broadcast, even subconsciously without knowing that you're making it. Are you scrolling down a web page using the scroll wheel of your mouse, the scroll bar of the browser, or the arrow keys, and so on and so forth? On top of that, actually, let me show you an example. So here is one example, which is swiping pattern on a mobile device. This shows 2 fingers on the screen. Here's the first user that scrolls with both their left and right finger. Another user scrolls mostly with the right finger. Another user does the same thing, but they have a shaky hand, and you can see the shaking swiping pattern. Here's a user with a scroll touchscreen that is stuck a little bit. Here is a user with a vertical swiping pattern, and here is a user that uses mostly the right finger and the left thumb, so they have different arcs. We use hundreds of those parameters. We have, for example, here's another methodology. It's a patent that we have, invisible challenge. Here is a user that is about to click a button. We can shift the button in a little bit around where they're going to be clicking, and they will compensate automatically without realizing that they're compensating, and their compensation pattern will give us information, and you can see on the right side that different users will shift on a consistent basis between sessions. Here's the bottom line, and I'll summarize here. Where is this being used and why? If you think about it, 100% of all fraud is happening inside authenticated sessions. Authentication, though, works. With enough friction, username, password, second factor authentication, tokens, facial recognition, fingerprinting, you will know who the user is. So how is fraud done? Modern threat takes over somebody's either through social engineering, through remote access Trojan, whether it's robotic or human activity. You can mask all the origin of where the threat is coming from, and you can wait for somebody to perfectly authenticate and then take over their account. Behavioral biometrics does not assume that any system will be perfect. It assumes that some penetration will happen, but we're there to monitor if something wrong is happening. And I will stop here, and would love to get any questions or comments.
So how do you develop a baseline?
So the way that it works is we reside inside the application of the bank, inside their website or app through small components that are data collectors. Okay. And everything we do is completely frictionless and invisible to the user. There is an automated process over which, over a certain period of several minutes per user, we build their behavioral profile using machine learning and advanced data science. It's all automated. And after a few minutes, we have the profile of the user and we have a baseline. Now, since the onboarding is invisible, it doesn't really matter because whether it takes 3 or 4 or 8 minutes per wherever the case is, one day the user becomes protected and then we go. Typically, with a very large bank, within 3 to 4 weeks, we have about 80% of their users profiled, and then the long tail comes within a few weeks after that.
So you mentioned, obviously, this is kind of a second layer defense post initial logon and second factor authentication. So what is your % reduction in fraud as a result with an organization that already has those controls in place?
It's an excellent question. So obviously, a lot of the information is confidential, but I'll give you order of magnitudes. A typical customer that where we're deployed, we typically prevent frauds in the many millions of dollars per year. But it's not just the amount of fraud that we detect. The fraud that we detect is usually fraud that no other solution can detect. So when we're being deployed, typically we're able to catch a lot of fraud that otherwise go through the radar of every existing solution in the marketplace, that is looking at a source of threat.
So let me rephrase it again. I'm assuming you're talking about a customer that's already doing single and two-factor authentication.
Yes.
So what percentage of their fraud, roughly, was reduced when your product was brought in? Not the dollar amount, percentage.
Okay, so this depends on how we calibrate it. So for example, it ties into the other issue of how many alerts we issue. But order of magnitude, we can sometimes catch 90-95% of all the fraud that otherwise wouldn't be caught. Yeah. And if we talk about value points, I implied it a little bit here in the beginning of the sentence. What we do helps the bank both in terms of reduction of fraud, so catching fraud losses, but also reduces friction in the system. So it is both about catching the wrong user that shouldn't be there, that nobody else can catch, but it's also about recognizing that the right user is there and avoiding escalation costs. So if all of a sudden you see a transaction in the Czech Republic, and it's an anomalous transaction, and the user never transacted there, and normally it would be flagged, but we see that the behavior is consistent, we can do the opposite, which is flag that the behavior is correct, avoid the back office operational escalation cost of dealing with a lot of false positives, reducing friction to the bank as well as friction to the end user. So there is both value in reducing fraud, but also in increasing accuracy at the same time.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of other behavioral technologies that have been applied over the years, especially in authentication in your timeline. And so you're beginning to offer these in the new platform. So how much of your business is mobile? Mm-hmm. Because it's a new channel, right?
Sure.
And then is the same technology is applied to the laptops and desktops. And broadly speaking, what is your largest deployment and for how long? Don't mention the company and so on.
So we operate in both web and mobile. We actually have dedicated endpoint technologies to each that connect to the same cloud-based hosted server that we have. I would say that today, still the predominant usage worldwide, at least that we see, is still web and shifting to mobile. Yeah. So in our own customer base, we have increasing demand for mobile, but you see banks are catching up saying we now need to offer the same functionality in mobile as we do in web. And one of the things that drive them to deploy us in mobile is we now have to increase the transaction limits in mobile to be equal to web. We have to offer payment through mobile. All of those things are really creating a playing level field cross-channel. But it is a shift. Still the bulk is still web, and it's moving to mobile more and more. In terms of deployments, we are a 5-year-old company. We started selling in 2015, won our major contracts in 2016, and we're now in the period of major renewals, all larger and longer term contracts across the board. To answer a question that is going to be coming up in a second, we expect 100% renewal this year. I heard it before. So our relationship are between 2 to 3 years old, and some of them are in their second renewal phase.
So how large what's your largest deployment? And again, back to, don't mention the company, just.
Well, when you say largest, depending on the number of users, with retail as well as corporate as well as wealth management. Mm-hmm. So retail bank could be 5 to 15 million user banks. Okay. We have those type of typical banks. Corporate could be 500,000 corporate accounts or 50,000 corporate accounts, depending on the bank. Wealth management, sometimes it's 50,000 accounts, but the asset value is staggering. Yeah.
How do you integrate into the infrastructure of one of your customers?
So on the web, the integration is integration of a JavaScript. Okay. On the mobile, it's a SDK. The bank integrates our components into their application, website or app, and then everything is done automatically in real time. When the bank wants an answer, let's say somebody is adding a payee or about to do a wire transfer, they send us a real-time server-to-server API call. On the fly, we see the current session, we see the historical behavior, we do all the machine learning, and we give instantaneous real-time output with a trust score saying how safe the session is or not, as well as a whole bunch of additional information on what we're seeing happening.
So you've collected the data related to a transaction before the query comes
yes.
in? Okay.
Yeah, on an ongoing basis. It's continuous authentication, okay. Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And next up is MobileIron CFO, Simon Biddiscombe.
Thank you. Thank you. We're a little unique in participating in this in that we are already a public company. And we've been public for about 3 years. And this year we're expected to do roughly 200 million in billings at the midpoint of the guidance. So because we're public, you get to look at my safe harbor statement. The key takeaway I want to leave you with today, it's very clear that in the world of constantly evolving threats, where workloads are moving from inside the firewall to mobile devices, from the enterprise data center to cloud-based services, the security paradigm changes enormously. And MobileIron has been successful in delivering solutions to cure for that problem to now well north of 14,000 customers, a sampling of whom you see here on the screen. So we protect data regardless of where that data is. So whether it sits on the device, whether it's in transit across a network, or whether it's actually in the enterprise data center or in the cloud, we provide the security solution that enables an enterprise to be comfortable with where its data is at any point in time. So let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. The move to mobile has been going on for an extended period of time at this point. And I'll show you in a few slides exactly how we think this impacts the business relative to specifically IoT and cloud-based solutions. But there's a new security paradigm associated with mobile, and there's a new security paradigm associated with cloud. Many of you in the room probably have MobileIron technology on your device today. You may or may not know that you have our solution on your device, but I assure you in certain circumstances, the technology is on your device and you're using it today. Employees demand a modern experience. Whether that modern experience is associated with using an iOS-based device, an Android-based device, or a Windows 10-based device that they chose to bring to the environment themselves, or whether that service that is a cloud-based service is something that's delivered from a Salesforce, or from a Box, or from a Dropbox, or from a Concur, or from a Workday, workloads have shifted outside. And clearly, the security paradigm has changed completely. No longer relevant are the traditional firewall companies, no longer relevant are the more modern firewall and threat management companies. Everything has shifted outside the firewall, and that's where governments and highly regulated industries around the globe have chosen to take advantage of the capabilities that MobileIron brings to bear. As we innovate around critical capabilities that are perceived to be necessary for success. So when you look at the work we do with federal governments around the globe, when you look at what we build on in terms of the certifications that we achieve here in the US and then leverage across customers in highly regulated verticals and then in other governments around the globe, there's a critical set of capabilities that are derived from having the certifications necessary to be successful. But we don't do this by ourselves. There's a large ecosystem of partners that we have to be able to leverage in order to be successful. People who provide security capabilities. The operating system vendors themselves. When your iOS device updates to the latest version of iOS, you expect that the MobileIron software will instantaneously work the way it worked the previous day. So whether it's security, device adoption, the service providers, who are obviously a critical part of how we think of route to market, AT&T's, Verizon's, Swisstel, Singtel, British Telecom, Deutsche Telekom, or whether it's the mobile awareness partners who we sit alongside and in many instances are important partners and an extension of how we think about our business. It's very clear that we've built out a very broad set of partners who we're able to leverage as we think about the market moving forward. So I'm going to touch on the critical growth drivers for the business really quickly here. Number one is the base business, that is applications and EMM, which is essentially where we derive all of our revenues from today. But more importantly are the top three vectors that you see there. Number one is cloud security. And last year we were able to introduce a product that actually has a third factor of authentication associated with it. And the classic use case for this technology is actually the disgruntled sales guy who's walking out the door and has decided he's going to download the entire Salesforce database to his wife's iPad. He signed in, he had a username and login. You may even have got the call off Duo saying, "Is that you?" But he still walked away with the entire Salesforce database because he had an app that he downloaded outside the enterprise app store. So what we bring to bear in cloud security is actually that third form of authentication. We talked this morning about IoT. use case for our technology and IoT is something that customers came to us for. They want to understand how to manage sensors. They want to understand how to update capabilities. And in many ways, a gateway in an IoT environment looks exactly the same as a cell phone does in the use cases that we've been deploying to for so many years. And then finally, desktop security. And Windows 10 offers an entirely different paradigm for how desktops can be managed as we move forward. So in closing, a base EMM business that has proven to be very successful for us over the course of a number of years, and 3 new growth catalysts associated with cloud security, desktop security, and IoT that sit on top of that. That's it.
Thank you. We're done, right? Time-wise?
I'm the CFO, so you don't get to ask me technical.
10 minutes are done?
So,
Oh, 5, okay, good.
so first question would be, is how come your product's not embedded in all the mobile devices?
So there's kind of 2 reasons, and really you have to kind of bifurcate the market. There's a part of the market that truly cares about security and management of mobile devices, and there's a part of the market that still has a good enough kind of attitude, okay? So the part of the market that cares about our technology is where on a day-to-day basis, we're going to compete head-to-head with VMware, and we're going to compete head-to-head with Microsoft to make sure that in those highly regulated verticals, the device is secured and managed the way you would expect it to be, okay? But once you get out of those highly regulated verticals and you start moving down to the SMB part of the market, there's a whole series of users who are just dealing with email where ActiveSync is deemed to be good enough. And there's a perception that if I can wipe the device, if I can get the email off the device, I don't need to worry too much about it. Well, that changes a lot when you start to think about privacy rules as they exist in Europe and the fact that you can't just wipe the device. You can't touch somebody's photos. You can't touch somebody's music that might also be on that device in a BYOD type scenario. So I think over time, you're going to see that part of the market shift toward a solution that is more like our solution than is a plain vanilla Microsoft ActiveSync good enough kind of scenario. But people need to become more aware of the security risks associated with mobile devices and cloud-based capabilities.
No, I just commend you the fact that, you know, you when you went public, you were primarily doing management.
Yeah, that's right.
And then my biggest question before you even started talking was, what are your growth drivers? So you're moving effectively, given this slide, that is you're moving towards security.
Very much so.
And not security just in the device, it's security broadly in the environment, the context of where your applications run.
Yeah, very much so. We can't and won't make investments that are significant standard deviations away from who we are on a day-to-day basis, okay? So we have to stay close to that base EMM capability in terms of how we think about that next set of investments from a technology perspective. The other part is the go-to-market part, right? So we have to be very cognizant of knowing who the customer is on the other side of the table, because historically that customer's been the buyer of the mobile capability. The desktop capability is one guy further over in the office, if you will. IoT came to us. IoT isn't something that we went searching for, and we're making very measured investments in, because that is further away from a go-to-market perspective at this point in time. So yeah, you're right. The company's been through a reinvention under a new management team. I'm part of that new management team. There's a new CEO who's been on board for about 15 months now. And there's a very significant shift toward the security capabilities that we have and away from the basic management that we went public with 3 years ago.
So can you drill down a little bit more on the IoT?
Sure.
Because IoT covers a pretty broad spectrum of sense. So where within IoT do you see the application?
So there's 2 applications that we're focused on at this point in time. And in both cases, they came to us, okay? We didn't go looking for the IoT market. We've got more than enough to invest in cloud security and desktop security at this point in time. In the case of IoT, 2 verticals that came to us. First one was oil and gas. And there was a fear by one of the major oil and gas companies that sensors on an oil rig may not be behaving the way they're supposed to be behaving if they're hacked. And what decision are you going to make based on the sensor's feed of data to a gateway that ultimately comes back to a data center that could impact the performance, safety, whatever, of the rig, okay? So in that case, it's a very specific set of capabilities that look an awful lot like our standard management and update of applications and devices that you apply to gateways and sensors that sit on oil rigs in that case. The second one's automotive. And that one may be far more apparent where people have looked at our capabilities and said, hey, if you're Tesla and you've got thousands of engineers who are focused on this, you're fine. But if you're not Tesla and you're one of the other auto companies who needs to find a solution of how to make sure that as a vehicle is receiving new applications, updates to applications, that it's done in a secure and managed way, that the way it's done using our technology is entirely consistent with how historically would have been done for a mobile device. So those are the two use cases where customers came to us and said, we really think we can use your technology, where we're applying a very measured approach today as to how we choose to think about the investment moving forward.
Cool, good.
Good job. Great.
That's it.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you very much.
And last but not least, we have Uniken CEO Bimal Gandhi and Global Business Development Robert Levine.
All right, so I'm the CEO, but in case, knowing this audience, you go 90 layers deep in the tech, I've got Robert up here with me. So we're a little different. We're probably the youngest company to come up on stage today. We're a cybersecurity company that does one thing and only one thing, but we do it incredibly well. We make connecting safe. Our Real ID platform has empowered 28 organizations to date, over 16 million devices, over 300 million interactions, and $400 billion of assets protected. But the only number you really need to remember is 0. To date, our clients have had 0 identity theft, 0 network intrusions, 0 financial dollar loss, and 0 data loss. So how do we make that possible? Well, rather than just add another layer of application security or make a better authenticator, we refactored the existing connect and then verify model, because it is broken, to verify and then connect. So the vulnerabilities that exist in TLS and SSL today with connect and then authenticate are removed. The result is a game-changing security platform which takes into account 21st century threat vectors. What we do is we mutually authenticate with strong authentication, continuous authentication, with channel security, and with secure data at rest. That's the foundation of our core security. We then applied this technology towards solving 3 important problems: credential compromise, an exponentially growing attack surface, and man-in-the-middle and DNS attacks, all while delivering a phenomenal client experience with 0 friction. Our target is to secure the millions or tens of millions of customers for financial services, retailing, healthcare, anywhere where you require high security and protection of information and dollars. You heard this morning credential compromise is responsible for a majority of fraud in the most recent reports that are out there. Real ID uses a combination of criteria to transparently authenticate the end user, not based on the classic something you know and something you have model, but we add a new unique dimension, something they don't know they have, thereby eliminating social engineering as an attack vector. Our platform delivers one-to-one key exchange at IoT scale. When I mean scale, it's 500 million concurrent sessions per installation. You're no longer dependent on public certificates anymore. Like the exchange of a Tor note in the old days of business, we actually provide perfect forward secrecy, no third parties ever required, and we validate on multiple mutual parameters that are quite nimble before the secure connection is ever made. And should a successful hack ever happen, it'll only impact that one user for that one transaction, given it's a one-to-one key exchange model. And if you think about the hack you have to make, you have to hack the user credential, a device fingerprint, an application fingerprint, a remote host identity, and then the one-to-one key all at the same time. That's a tremendous amount of compute that you need. By the way, we have a low payload, low bandwidth, low power solutions that's IoT ready, but we are an API SDK on a mobile platform today. We resolve phishing because our keys are never known to the end user. They're not seen on the wire for third parties to snoop, and the keys are locked to a context of the app to the user to the device, speaking to the remote app. As organizations roll out rich mobile apps to millions of their customers, they're really exponentially increasing their attack surface and making the mobile device a critical element of weakness. Real ID allows you to make your infrastructure go dark and only accept connections from pre-verified endpoints that have been whitelisted. This significantly reduces your attack surface, and by going dark, the technology with mutual client and server-side continuous authentication to the channel itself, we completely prevent MITM and TLS overuse issues. So you heard about Cloudbleed, the Brazilian hack in the morning. Those documented hacks are not possible with our technology. More importantly, by solving these problems, our clients have grown their digital business because we enable new business functionality. With zero friction, the amount of things you can do, the amount of risk you can take with driving fraud close to zero really changes the game from a business perspective. Let me end with an example. A year ago, a little over a year ago, I was at a public conference, and I put our personal banking credentials, my username and password, the bank institution's name, and our balance up on the screen. And I said, there you go, have at it. Well, it's a little more than a year now, and the money's still there. So if you want to learn more from us or talk about investing in our current round, please come see me later.
All right, well done.
So if a company had enough vision and invested in you and believed in you, what do you think they're going to see in 18 months?
So in 18 months, where we're at today is we're sort of on that apex curve. So 18 months from now, I would think that we'll have 350 million users on the platform. We'll have about 25 global institutions. We'll increase some of our military and intelligence business, but we will become the emerging standard. And I think the dependence on SSL will slowly start to wane, and we will be picking up with one-to-one key exchange.
Well, can you characterize the customers you currently have? So you talked about financial services,
Sure.
but I know you've got some others.
So today we have financial services and mobile banking. We have some customer use. We have actually customers in manufacturing that have recognized the vendor base as a real weak point. So they're implementing us in the vendor universe to prevent the Home Depot type hacks. We're now, with our new product that we launched a few months ago, we're able to do 100% transaction verification without the use of a third party. Again, very frictionless, and that's really starting to pick up. So that's expanding us into all realms of approval, whether it's monetary, it's financial, it's workflow. And because it's an API SDK, it works quite well.
Who do you sell to? Who's your buyer?
So my ideal buyer is the chief digital officer or a business. If you think about it, businesses invest hundreds of millions of dollars in their brand. Security is a board level issue, but we create an amazing brand experience that's complementary. By lowering that friction, it is phenomenal. So all of you are used to calling a call center, and even though they know you, you have to verify some information to get into the call center. Well, we have a solution that eliminates the need to ever share PII again with an agent and only releases that screen to an agent once they've authenticated you and you've authenticated them. And so it's very powerful. I presented to the chairman of the largest wealth management in the company in the world, and they fell out of their chair. And the quote that he gave me, it says, it takes 24 months to implement this technology. We're going to do it in 9. We're actually going to roll out in faster than 9 months with them.
In time to integrate, how long? Give me an example of a deployment.
Since it's an API SDK,
Yep.
The fastest we've ever done it, if you use our reference application, has been 3 hours and 22 minutes. Somebody actually started the clock and we got them up and running. Average time to implementation is between 3 weeks and 3 months. We integrate to a gateway server, and it's an API SDK, very, very simple, very nimble to go through.
And the gateway server is your own, right? That's what I understand.
It's a soft appliance, so horizontally scalable perfectly well. Our sales model is concurrent sessions or per user. So we're indifferent how they want to roll that technology out, how many servers they want to put it out. And our pricing model is actually quite innovative as well.
So tell me about your innovative pricing model.
So at scale, a penny a user.
on annual per
Annual
transaction?
recurring license.
Okay.
Annual recurring license. Your next question is probably what's my average ticket size right now. Our last 3 clients have been clocking at, just as initial implementations, at about 150,000. We'll grow to 450 and then to about 850 with them over the next 18, 20 months. And we've got a great team, so I'll put a plug. We've got some of the best minds in security. And we're also fortunate enough to have a Turing Award winner as our Chief Security Officer, Dr. Whitfield Diffie, since we've improved on Diffie-Hellman's key exchange algorithm. All right.
Well done.
There's a question
One
from,
question for the crowd. Say, who are your competitors and why are they better than you?
So who are my competitors? You know, my biggest competitor is the installed base of traditional security with SSL pinning, device fingerprinting, the whatnot. If you look at, obviously, in the vendor universe, it could be everybody from a BioCatch to a Vasco, but our solution is very innovative, and we transverse the world of device fingerprinting, tokens, certificates, et cetera. So we don't believe we have a pure play, and in fact, most of the time, the comparison of our technology is against the inbuilt solution of relying on SSL. And what we find now is that, you know, if we show them their app and we show them on a compromised network that you can crack and pack the SSL, I'd say about 70% of the apps out there are vulnerable to that. So it actually is a nice way to go up against the competition.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much.
great, thank you.
I didn't have.